The dust of the Texas plains wasn't just a path for cattle. For 10-year-old Sumi Vance, it was meant to be a grave, left to die under the unforgiving sun by the one person who should have protected her. Her story should have ended there. But destiny carried on the back of a powerful black stallion had other plans. This isn't just a tale of survival. It's the true, life-altering story of how a forgotten orphan became the heart of a cattle empire, and how a rich, solitary cowboy found a daughter in the dust. It's a story of secrets, betrayal, and a love that would either redeem a legacy or burn it to the ground. The year was 1878, and the Texas air was thick with the heat of a cruel August sun. For 10-year-old Sumi Vance, the world had shrunk to the rhythmic creak of wagon wheels and the cold, sharp glances of her stepmother Beatrice. Her father Thomas Vance, a gentleman with a dreamer's heart and a failing lung, had passed 2 months prior. His last breath, a whispered promise to Sumi that she would be cared for. That promise, it seemed, had turned to dust as quickly as his body had returned to the earth. Beatrice was a woman carved from hardship and greed. Thomas had been her ticket away from a life of servitude, but his meager savings and small plot of land were an insult to her ambitions. The true prize was a trust left by Sumi's maternal grandmother that would become Sumi's upon her 18th birthday. It wasn't a vast fortune, but it was enough for Beatrice to covet with a venomous passion. With Sumi gone, the trust would legally revert to her guardian. "We're heading west, Sumi," Beatrice had announced, her voice as brittle as dry leaves. "To California. A new start." The journey was a blur of misery. Beatrice was stingy with water, and even stingier with kindness. Sumi's small frame grew thinner, her sun-bleached hair matted with dust. The final stop came near a desolate stretch of the Brazos River, a place where the earth cracked from thirst and buzzards circled with lazy patience. Beatrice pulled the wagon to a halt beside a gnarled, skeletal mesquite tree. "Get out," she commanded. "Go fetch some water from the river, and take your time." Sumi, clutching the small, worn locket her father had given her, the only thing of value she had left, nodded obediently. She scrambled down the riverbank, the clay crumbling under her worn boots. The water was brown and sluggish. As she dipped her canteen, she heard the sharp crack of a whip, followed by the groan of the wagon wheels turning. She scrambled back up the bank, her heart hammering against her ribs. The wagon was already 100 yards away, kicking up a cloud of indifferent dust. "Beatrice!" She screamed, her voice a tiny, desperate thing in the vast emptiness. "Wait, you forgot me." But Beatrice did not look back. The wagon grew smaller and smaller, a disappearing speck on the horizon. The silence that descended was absolute, broken only by the caw of a distant crow. Panic gave way to a chilling, soul-crushing understanding. She hadn't been forgotten. She had been left, discarded like a broken doll on the side of a forgotten trail, left for the sun and the coyotes. For 2 days, Sumi survived. She huddled in the shade of the mesquite tree by day, and shivered in the cold by night, clutching her locket and whispering her father's name. The water from the river kept her alive, but her hope was evaporating faster than the morning dew. On the 3rd day, as her vision blurred and her small body began to surrender to the inevitable, she heard a new sound. It wasn't the wind or the cry of a hawk. It was the steady, powerful beat of horse hooves. Through a dizzying haze, she saw a figure emerge from the shimmering heat, a man on a magnificent black stallion, so dark it seemed to drink the sunlight. He was tall in the saddle, wearing a dark duster and a wide-brimmed Stetson that shadowed his face. He pulled the horse to a stop, dismounting, with a grace that spoke of a lifetime spent on horseback. He knelt beside her. and she saw his face. It was weathered by the sun, and etched with lines of seriousness, but his eyes, the color of a stormy grey sea, held a shocking gentleness. He uncorked his own canteen, holding it to her cracked lips. The water was cool and clean, the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. "Easy now, little one," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "You're safe." He was Michael Blackwood, a name that commanded respect and fear in equal measure across Texas. He was the owner of the sprawling Blackwood Creek Ranch, a cattle baron whose wealth was the stuff of legend. He was also a man hollowed out by grief, having lost his wife and infant son to cholera a decade earlier. He had been tracking a pack of wolves that had been harassing his southern herds when he saw the glint of the sun off Sumi's locket. He gently lifted the frail girl into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. As he settled her in front of him on his saddle, her small hand instinctively clutched the front of his shirt. For the first time in 10 years, a crack appeared in the fortress Michael Blackwood had built around his heart. He didn't know her story, but as he spurred his horse, Diablo, towards the distant haven of his ranch, he made a silent vow. This child found on the edge of death would not know such desolation again. The Blackwood Creek Ranch wasn't just a piece of land. It was a kingdom carved out of the wild Texas frontier. The main house was a sprawling 2-story structure of stone and dark timber, with a wide veranda that looked out over a sea of rolling grasslands dotted with thousands of cattle bearing the BC brand. It was a place of power, wealth, and profound loneliness. Sumi's arrival was a quiet disruption to the ranch's stoic rhythm. Michael carried her directly to the main house, bypassing the bunkhouse full of curious cowboys. He handed her over to Martha, the stout, no-nonsense cook and housekeeper who had been with him since before his wife's passing. Martha's stern face softened the moment she saw the child. "Lord have mercy, Mr. Blackwood. What have you found?" "Trouble, I imagine." Michael rumbled, but his eyes never left Sumi. "Get her cleaned up. Find her something to wear. Anything of Anna's that might fit." Anna. The name hung in the air, a ghost rarely summoned. Martha nodded, her expression unreadable, and led Sumi away. The bath was a luxury Sumi had nearly forgotten. The dress, one of Anna's from her own childhood, that Martha had kept preserved in a cedar chest, was made of soft calico, and felt like a queen's robes against her skin. Life at Blackwood Creek was a revelation. In the weeks that followed, color returned to Sumi's cheeks and light to her eyes. She spoke little of her past, and Michael, a man who respected the sanctity of scars, never pressed. He learned her name was Sumi Vance, that her father was gone, and that her stepmother had taken her west. The unspoken truth of her abandonment hung between them, a shared secret that forged a bond stronger than blood. Michael found himself doing things he hadn't done in a decade. He read to her from worn copies of Shakespeare and Mark Twain in the evenings, his deep voice filling the quiet study. He took her out on a gentle mare named Daisy, teaching her to ride not with the harsh efficiency of a ranch hand, but with the patient hands of a father. He showed her the vastness of his empire, from the shimmering creek that gave the ranch its name to the distant mesas that glowed purple at sunset. Sumi, in turn, breathed life back into the hollow halls of the great house. Her laughter, at first a tentative sound, began to echo off the timbered ceilings. She followed Martha in the kitchen, learning the rhythms of baking and the comfort of a well-tended home. She wasn't a replacement for the child Michael had lost, but she was a balm on a wound he thought would never heal. He officially adopted her, giving her his name. She was no longer Sumi Vance, the abandoned orphan. She was Sumi Blackwood, daughter of the most powerful man in the county. Among the dozens of cowboys on the ranch, one stood apart. Jasper Riley, known to most as Jess, was a young man of about 19, quiet and intense, with eyes the colour of whiskey and a preternatural skill with horses. He was a drifter who had arrived a year prior, looking for work, and had quickly earned a reputation as the best horsebreaker Michael had ever seen. He rarely spoke, and a certain melancholy clung to him like a shadow a past he kept locked away. Sumi first noticed him in the corral. He was working with a wild mustang, a volatile creature that had thrown every other man who dared to mount it. Jess didn't use force or fear. He moved with a slow, hypnotic grace, speaking to the animal in a low murmur, his touch gentle but firm. It was like watching a secret language being spoken between man and beast. Sumi was mesmerized. Their first real conversation happened by the creek. Sumi was skipping stones when Jess rode up to water his horse. "You shouldn't be out this far alone, Miss Blackwood," he said, his voice softer than she expected. "Michael is just over that ridge," she replied, not wanting to sound like a child in need of watching. "And my name is Sumi." He gave a slight nod, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Jess." He didn't say more, but from that day on, a silent understanding grew between them. He would often leave a perfect, smooth, skipping stone on the porch railing for her. When she began riding more confidently, he was the one who taught her how to truly feel the horse beneath her, to move as one. He was a puzzle she couldn't solve, a quiet presence in the background of her new life, yet somehow she felt a strange connection to his solitude, a kinship in the unspoken sorrows they both seemed to carry. 8 years passed in the blink of a Texas season. The scrawny, terrified girl had blossomed into a striking young woman of 18. Sumi Blackwood was her father's pride. She possessed her birth father's gentle heart and her adoptive father's iron will. She could ride as well as any ranch hand understood the complex logistics of a cattle drive, and could charm a visiting cattle buyer with a grace that belied her rugged upbringing. The Blackwood Creek Ranch was in her blood now, and for Michael, seeing her thrive was a daily affirmation that his one impulsive act of kindness had been the best decision of his life. Her relationship with Jasper Jess Riley had also deepened, evolving from a childhood fascination into a quiet, intense current of unspoken affection. Jess was now the ranch foreman, a position of immense trust that Michael had bestowed upon him. He was still a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He was fiercely protective of Sumi, his eyes always finding her in a crowd, his presence a steady comfort. The romance between them ignited not in a grand declaration, but in a series of stolen moments. A moonlit ride to check on a newborn foal where their hands brushed and lingered for a heartbeat too long. A shared dance at a town social where the world seemed to melt away, leaving only the two of them swaying to the music of a lone fiddle. A crisis during a flash flood where Jess risked his own life to pull her from a surging current, his arms holding her with a desperate strength that had nothing to do with rescue and everything to do with a fear of loss. "I thought I'd lost you," he'd breathed into her hair, his voice raw with emotion. In that moment, Sumi knew the depth of her feelings for him was not just a girl's crush, but a woman's love. But their budding romance was not without its shadows. The neighboring ranch, a smaller but still significant spread of land, belonged to the McGrath family. A bitter feud, old and deep-rooted, existed between Michael Blackwood and the patriarch Cormac McGrath. The origin of the feud was lost to local gossip. Some said it was over water rights, others whispered of a card game gone wrong, and a few old-timers hinted at a more personal betrayal involving Michael's late wife, Anna. Whatever the cause, the hatred was real. Cormac McGrath was a hard, unforgiving man with 2 sons who shared his resentful nature. Jess always grew tense when the McGraths were mentioned. He steered clear of their men in town, and his face would tighten into a grim mask if their name came up at the dinner table. Sumi assumed it was simply loyalty to Michael. The first real twist of fate arrived with the mail coach. A letter bearing the mark of a law firm from St. Louis was addressed to Michael. Inside it spoke of the estate of Thomas Vance. The lawyers had been trying to locate his daughter Sumi for years. It turned out the trust from her maternal grandmother was far more substantial than anyone had realized, thanks to some shrewd investments in railroads. Sumi was in her own right a wealthy woman. The news was unsettling. It was a reminder of a life she had long buried. But Michael was pragmatic. "This is your birthright, Sumi. We'll have my lawyer look into it. It changes nothing between us. But it did change something. It stirred the past. And the past, it turned out, was not dead." A few weeks later, a new face appeared in the nearby town of Redemption. A woman dressed in widow's black, calling herself Mrs. Eleanor Dubois, arrived on the stagecoach. She was elegant, articulate, and carried an air of tragic grace. She claimed to be a recent widow from the East, looking for a quiet place to settle her affairs and perhaps make a modest investment. No one in Redemption, least of all Sumi or Michael, knew that behind the veil of mourning and the false name was the cruel, calculating face of Beatrice. After abandoning Sumi, she had used forged documents to claim the Vance Trust, only to find it was locked until Sumi's 18th birthday, or confirmed death. She lived in poverty for years, her bitterness festering. When she heard rumors of a wealthy heiress named Sumi Blackwood in Texas, a girl of the right age adopted by a rich cattleman, she knew her discarded pawn had somehow survived and stumbled into a fortune far greater than the one she'd been cheated out of. She had come to Redemption not for a quiet life, but to reclaim what she saw as hers with interest, and she would destroy anyone who stood in her way. Beatrice, now inhabiting the guise of the refined Mrs. Dubois, played her part with masterful precision. She rented a small, respectable cottage at the edge of town and made herself a quiet fixture in Redemption's social landscape. She joined the church sewing circle, donated modestly to town fundraisers, and spoke with poignant sadness of her late husband, a kind but unfortunate businessman. Her genteel manners and tragic backstory quickly earned her the sympathy and trust of the townspeople. Her true target, however, was the Blackwood Creek Ranch. She began by gathering information, listening to idle gossip in the general store and the saloon. She learned of Michael's immense wealth, his devotion to his adopted daughter, and the ironclad loyalty of his crew. She also learned of the enigmatic foreman, Jess Riley, and the budding romance between him and the Blackwood heiress. Most importantly, she learned of the deep-seated animosity between Michael Blackwood and Cormac McGrath. A feud she realized was a weakness to be exploited. Her first move was subtle. She sought a meeting with Michael under the pretense of seeking financial advice. "Mr. Blackwood," she began, her voice a delicate blend of fragility and resolve. "I have a small inheritance I wish to invest. As the most successful man in the region, I hoped you might offer a poor widow some guidance." Michael, ever the gentleman, was polite but reserved. He felt a flicker of something unsettling in the woman's eyes, a hungry intensity that her sorrowful demeanor couldn't quite conceal. He gave her some generic, non-committal advice and sent her on her way, a seed of suspicion planted in his mind. Sumi met Mrs. Dubois at a town picnic. The woman was charming, complimenting Sumi on her spirit and beauty. "You are so fortunate, my dear," Beatrice cooed her eyes, scanning Sumi's face, searching for any trace of the scrawny child she'd left for dead. "To have found such a wonderful home. Some children are not so lucky." Sumi felt an inexplicable chill at the woman's touch, a primal revulsion that she couldn't explain. She brushed it off as a strange reaction, but the feeling lingered. Beatrice's true machinations began when she orchestrated a chance encounter with Cormac McGrath. She found him at the saloon, nursing a whiskey and his perennial grudge. She introduced herself, and over the course of several calculated conversations, began to stoke the embers of his hatred for Michael Blackwood. "It's a tragedy. What happened to your family's claim on the Willow Creek pasture?" she'd say, referencing a disputed piece of land that now belonged to Blackwood. A man like Michael Blackwood, he takes what he wants. He seems to have a talent for acquiring things that belong to others. Land, perhaps even children. She slowly poisoned Cormac's mind with insinuations. She hinted that Sumi's adoption was not a rescue, but a calculated theft. "I heard a whisper from my travels," she lied smoothly, "about a Vance family whose daughter went missing on a trail west. The stepmother was left devastated, her reputation ruined by rumors she'd abandoned the child. But what if the child was taken stolen by a lonely, powerful man who wanted an heir?" Cormac, his mind clouded by whiskey and decades of resentment, began to see a new angle in his old feud. If Blackwood's claim to his daughter was fraudulent, perhaps his entire empire was built on a foundation of lies. Meanwhile, the pressure was building on Jess. Cormac McGrath had sent his sons to deliver a message. They cornered him near the stables one evening. "Father wants to see you." The older son, Caleb, sneered. "He says it's time you remember whose blood runs in your veins." Jess's face was a stony mask. "I work for Michael Blackwood. I have no business with your father." "You are our business," Caleb spat. "A McGrath working as Blackwood's top man. It's a disgrace. Father has a plan. A way to finally break Blackwood. He expects you to be a part of it." Jess turned his back on them. "Tell your father to leave me out of his wars." But the encounter left him shaken. His secret, the one he had guarded for years, was becoming a heavy, dangerous burden. His real name was not Jasper Riley. It was Jasper McGrath. He was Cormac's youngest son. Years ago, disgusted by his father's bitterness and cruelty, and haunted by the feud that he believed had unjustly ruined lives, he had left home, taking a new name and seeking a different path. He never intended to work for his father's sworn enemy, but the job at Blackwood Creek had been available, and his skill with horses had spoken for itself. He had stayed because of Michael's unexpected fairness, and then he had stayed because of Sumi. He was in love with the daughter of the man his father was sworn to destroy. He was a traitor to his family, living a lie in the heart of the enemy's camp, and the walls were closing in. The carefully constructed world of Blackwood Creek began to fray at the edges. The tension was a palpable thing, a low hum of impending disaster. Michael, ever watchful, noticed the change in his foreman. Jess was distracted, his shoulders perpetually tight, with a strain that had nothing to do with the rigors of ranch work. He saw the way Jess and Sumi looked at each other, a desperate, unspoken conversation passing between them. The first thread unraveled in Sumi's hands. She was in Jess's small cabin, a place she rarely entered, leaving a book she'd promised to lend him. As she set it on his nightstand, she knocked over a small carved wooden box. It fell to the floor, the lid popping open. Inside, nestled on a piece of faded velvet, was a silver belt buckle. It wasn't a cowboy's flashy adornment, but a simple, elegant piece. Engraved in the center was a prominent, stylized M. Sumi froze. She had seen that crest before. It was the McGrath brand, a mark she had been taught to despise. Beneath the buckle was a yellowed photograph of a stern-faced woman and 3 boys. The youngest boy, with defiant, whiskey-colored eyes, was unmistakably a younger Jasper. The air left her lungs. Jasper Riley, the man she loved, the man her father trusted implicitly, was a McGrath, a son of their most hated enemy. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, that it felt like a physical blow. She backed out of the cabin. The image of the buckle burned into her mind, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She confronted him that evening, by the creek, the site of so many of their gentle moments. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. Jess's face paled. He saw the accusation in her eyes and knew the lie was over. "Sumi, let me explain." "Explain what?" she cried, tears streaming down her face. "Explain why you're living here under a false name, spying for your father. What was this all for, Jess? Or should I say, Jasper McGrath? Were you sent to get close to me, to learn the ranch's weaknesses?" "No, never," he insisted, taking a step towards her. "I left my family. I left that name behind because I couldn't stand the hate. I stayed here because of your father's decency, and then because of you. I love you, Sumi." "Love?" She scoffed, the word tasting like poison. "How can you speak of love when your whole life here has been a lie?" She turned and ran, ignoring his desperate calls. The man she had given her heart to was a phantom, a lie woven by the family sworn to ruin hers. While Sumi's world was collapsing, Michael was facing his own confrontation. Acting on the poison whispered by Mrs. Dubois, Cormac McGrath, flanked by the town sheriff and a lawyer, rode up to the Blackwood ranch house. "Blackwood," Cormac snarled, dismounting. "We've come on a matter of law. I have reason to believe this girl Sumi is not your legal daughter, that you found her and kept her without ever searching for her rightful family." Michael stood on the veranda, his face like granite. "Sumi is my daughter in every way that matters. I have the adoption papers to prove it." It was then that Beatrice played her trump card. She stepped forward from behind the sheriff, her black veil pushed back. "But the adoption is fraudulent if it was based on the lie that her legal guardian was deceased." Michael stared at her. Time seemed to slow as his mind sifted through the years, trying to place the familiar, yet horribly changed face. The greedy glint in her eyes, the cruel set of her mouth. It was a face from a story Sumi had only ever hinted at in nightmares. "You." Michael breathed, the realization dawning with sickening certainty. Beatrice smiled, a cold, triumphant twist of her lips. "My name is Beatrice Vance. I am Sumi's stepmother and her legal guardian, and I have come to take my daughter back." Just then, Sumi, her face streaked with tears from her confrontation with Jess, came around the side of the house. She saw the posse of men, she saw Cormac McGrath, and then she saw the woman standing beside him. The face was older, harsher, but it was unmistakably the same one that had haunted her dreams for 8 years. "No." Sumi whispered the single word, a breath of pure terror. "Sumi, my dear child," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with false affection. "After all these years, I've finally found you." The world spun. Her lover was a liar, and the monster from her past had returned, wearing a cloak of righteousness and standing beside her family's greatest enemy. The carefully built sanctuary of her life had just been revealed to be a house of cards, and it was collapsing all around her. The revelation shattered the fragile peace of the valley. Beatrice Vance, with Cormac McGrath at her side, became an immediate and formidable threat. They presented a case to the circuit judge, armed with Beatrice's legal guardianship and Cormac's trumped-up accusations of kidnapping. Their strategy was twofold. Beatrice would reclaim Sumi and, by extension, control of her sizable inheritance, while Cormac would use the scandal to legally challenge Michael's land claims, particularly the valuable Willow Creek pasture that bordered his property. Rumors flew through Redemption, painting Michael as a villain and Sumi as a tragic victim. The Blackwood Creek Ranch became a fortress, not against rustlers, but against lawyers and whispers. Michael was a grim, silent force, his legal team from Austin working day and night to counter the assault. But the emotional toll was far greater. Sumi retreated into herself, the dual betrayals leaving her adrift in a sea of confusion and pain. She refused to see Jess, who was now a pariah on the ranch he had once commanded. The cowboys loyal to Michael and Sumi viewed Jess with open hostility. He was a McGrath, a snake they had unknowingly welcomed into their midst. Michael, however, had not fired him. In a tense private meeting, Jess had laid the whole truth bare, his disgust with his father, his reasons for leaving his love for Sumi. "I never meant to deceive you, Michael," Jess said, his voice strained. "And I have never not for 1 second been disloyal to this ranch or to Sumi." Michael listened, his grey eyes searching Jess's face. "Your blood is your blood, son. But a man is defined by his actions. The time for choosing a side is over. Now you have to prove which one you're on." He confined Jess to the bunkhouse, a prisoner of his own divided loyalties. Beatrice, growing impatient with the slow pace of the law, decided to escalate matters. She knew that Michael's wealth wasn't just in cattle. Old rumors spoke of a hidden silver vein somewhere in the high pastures, the very land Cormac coveted. She convinced Cormac that a direct, more aggressive approach was needed to break Michael's spirit. The attack came at dusk, under the cover of a brewing thunderstorm. It wasn't an open raid, but something far more insidious. 2 of Cormac McGrath's men, guided by a disgruntled former Blackwood hand whom Beatrice had bribed, snuck onto the northern range. Their goal was to start a wildfire, a blaze that, fanned by the storm winds, would sweep down towards the main house and barns, forcing an evacuation and creating chaos that the McGraths could exploit. Jess, confined to the bunkhouse, couldn't shake a feeling of dread. He knew his father's temper and his new allies' desperation. He watched the sky darken, the clouds churning with an unnatural speed. Then he saw it, a faint orange glow on the distant northern ridge, a light that wasn't lightning. He didn't hesitate. He burst out of the bunkhouse, ignoring the surprised shouts of the other cowboys. He ran to the stables, saddling Diablo Michael's own powerful stallion, the only horse fast enough to cover the distance. "Jess, what are you doing?" yelled one of the hands blocking his path. "Fire!" Jess yelled back, pointing to the ridge. "On the north range, they're trying to burn us out." The alarm was raised instantly. Michael, his face grim, organized his men to ride out and fight the blaze. But the fire was spreading with terrifying speed, a roaring beast consuming the dry grassland. Sumi, standing on the veranda, watched in horror as the fiery serpent slithered down the hillside. Her father was riding into the inferno. The man she loved was a lie. The woman who tried to destroy her was back to finish the job. In that moment of absolute crisis, the fear and heartbreak in her coalesced into a hard, defiant resolve. This was her home. These were her people. She would not let them burn. She ran not for the safety of the cellar, but for the stables, intent on helping. She was stopped by a figure emerging from the shadows. It was Beatrice. "Going somewhere, dear?" Beatrice asked, a cruel smile on her face. In her hand, she held a lit lantern. "It's all over. By morning, Blackwood will be ruined, and you'll be coming with me." "I will never go with you." Sumi spat, her eyes blazing with hatred. "You have no choice." Beatrice shrieked, her mask of civility gone, revealing the raw greed beneath. "You owe me. I should have left you in a ditch, not on a trail." She lunged, intending to drag Sumi away. But the girl Beatrice remembered was gone. In her place, stood a woman forged by the love of a good man and the strength of the land. Sumi shoved her stepmother back with a force that surprised them both. At the same time, miles away in the heart of the fire, Jess was proving his allegiance. He rode Diablo with a reckless courage, his knowledge of the land, both Blackwood and McGrath territory, giving him an edge. He realized the fire was being deliberately channeled by the wind toward a narrow canyon, which would act like a funnel, accelerating the blaze directly toward the ranch house. He broke away from the main group of firefighters galloping along a treacherous ridge. He knew of an old, unused irrigation ditch that ran perpendicular to the canyon. If he could divert the nearby creek into it, he could create a fire break. It was a desperate, near-suicidal gamble. With flames licking at Diablo's heels and smoke searing his lungs, he reached the dilapidated sluice gate. Using his lariat and the horse's strength, he strained against the rusted mechanism. With a groaning screech of tortured metal, the gate gave way. A torrent of water flooded the dry ditch, creating a wide, muddy barrier just as the head of the fire reached the canyon's edge. The blaze hit the wet earth, hissing and steaming its momentum, broken. Jess had saved the heart of the ranch. Back at the house, as the glow of the fire began to recede, the confrontation between Sumi and Beatrice was interrupted by the return of the sheriff, who had seen the blaze from town. He arrived to find Beatrice trying to restrain a furious Sumi. Her frantic, hateful ranting about what she was owed combined with the lantern in her hand and the obvious timing of the fire was all the proof he needed. Cormac McGrath's men were caught trying to flee the scene and quickly confessed who had sent them. The siege was over. The serpent had been caught in her own trap. The aftermath of the fire left a scar on the land, a blackened patch of earth that served as a stark reminder of the hatred that had nearly consumed them all. But as the sun rose the next morning, its light fell upon a ranch that was wounded, but not broken. The heart of Blackwood Creek, the house, the barns, the people had been saved. Beatrice Vance was arrested, her wild accusations and claims of guardianship dissolving in the face of arson and attempted kidnapping. Her carefully constructed facade had crumbled, revealing the bitter, greedy woman she truly was. She was last seen in the back of a prison wagon, her face a mask of impotent rage, finally facing justice for a crime committed 8 years prior. Cormac McGrath, implicated by his own men and publicly disgraced, was ruined. The legal case against Michael collapsed. Stripped of his reputation and facing financial ruin, he became a recluse. The fire of his long-held feud finally extinguished, leaving behind only the cold ashes of defeat. In the quiet of the morning, after Michael and Sumi stood on the veranda, looking out at the damaged land. The air was still thick with the smell of smoke, but it was also clean, purged of the lies and secrets that had poisoned it. "He saved us," Michael said quietly, his gaze fixed on the figure of Jess, who was exhaustedly helping the other men tend to the horses. "The boy saved everything." Sumi's heart ached. The anger and sense of betrayal were still there, but they were now mingled with a profound, undeniable truth. Jess had risked his life, not for his father, not for his name, but for them, for her. She walked down from the porch, her steps hesitant at first, then more certain. She stopped before him. His face was smudged with soot, his clothes singed, and his eyes were full of a weary pain as he looked at her. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because this is my home," Jess said, his voice raw. "And you are my life. My name is Jasper McGrath, Sumi. I can't change that. But my heart is not my father's. It's yours. It has been from the first day I saw you skipping stones by the creek." Tears welled in Sumi's eyes, but this time they were not tears of sorrow or rage. They were tears of release. She stepped forward, and laid her hand on his cheek. In that touch, forgiveness was given, and a future was acknowledged. Life at Blackwood Creek found a new rhythm in the months that followed. The land began to heal with new blades of green grass pushing up through the blackened soil. Michael, watching Sumi and Jess rebuild their relationship on a foundation of honesty, finally let go of the last vestiges of his own past bitterness. He approached Jess one afternoon, not as a boss, but as a father. "The McGrath feud ends today," Michael stated. "What your father did is his own burden. Your name doesn't matter to me. Your character does." He formally offered Jess the position of foreman, again, not just as an employee, but as a future son-in-law. The Vance inheritance, once a tool of Beatrice's greed, became a force for good. Sumi used a portion of it to help rebuild parts of redemption that had been neglected, and to establish a small fund for orphaned children making their way west. She was Sumi Blackwood, but she honored the memory of Sumi Vance and the kind father she had lost so long ago. One evening as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the healing hills, Sumi and Jess stood on a ridge overlooking the vast expanse of the ranch. Her head rested on his shoulder, his arm securely around her. The locket her father had given her rested against her chest, a symbol of the past, while the strong, steady beat of Jess's heart against her back was a promise of the future. She had been a girl left to die, a piece of unwanted baggage on a dusty trail. Now she was the heart of a kingdom, loved by a father who had chosen her, and a man who had defied his own name for her. She had learned that family was not merely a matter of blood, but of loyalty sacrifice, and a love strong enough to rise from the ashes brighter and more resilient than before. The spring of 1879 was a time of profound healing for the land and its people. The scars on the northern range were slowly hidden by a vibrant carpet of bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush. At the Blackwood Creek Ranch, the lingering smoke of betrayal had been replaced by the sweet air of hope. Sumi and Jess were inseparable, their love having been tested by fire and lies now forged into something stronger than steel. They were planning a small wedding for the fall, a celebration not just of their union, but of the survival of their home. Michael Blackwood, for the first time in over a decade, looked to the future not with grim determination, but with genuine, quiet joy. The ghosts of the past, it seemed, had finally been laid to rest. But the past has many doors, and one was about to swing open. It arrived not with the thunder of hooves or the crack of a whip, but with the stately, almost silent roll of a fine enclosed carriage drawn by two perfectly matched grey geldings. Such a vehicle was a rarity in redemption, a creature of the city entirely out of place on the dusty main street. It pulled up before the sheriff's office, and from it emerged a man who was as foreign to this land as his carriage. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored wool suit, his starched collar unfazed by the Texas heat. His hair was streaked with silver at the temples, and he carried a silver-headed cane, though he walked with no limp. His face was a mask of stern propriety, his eyes the color of cold slate. He introduced himself to the sheriff as Mr. Arthur Pendleton, an attorney from Philadelphia. He was looking for his niece, Miss Sumi Vance. Word traveled fast. By the time the carriage made its way up the long drive to the Blackwood Creek Ranch, Michael, Sumi, and Jess were waiting on the veranda, a sense of uneasy curiosity hanging in the air. Mr. Pendleton alighted from his carriage, his gaze sweeping over the rustic grandeur of the ranch house, with a barely concealed look of disdain. "I am Arthur Pendleton," he announced, his voice crisp and authoritative. "I am the brother of the late Lillian Pendleton, Sumi's mother." The statement landed with the force of a physical blow. Sumi stared at him, speechless. She had known her mother's name was Lillian, But that was all. Her mother was a ghost, a faded memory belonging only to her father. My mother's brother," Sumi stammered. "Indeed," Arthur said, his cold eyes finally settling on her. "It has taken my family's private investigators a considerable amount of time and resources to locate you, especially after the unfortunate business with the fraudulent Mrs. Vance. We were relieved to learn you were alive, though horrified to discover the circumstances in which you have been living." His tone was not one of a joyful reunion. It was one of assessment of judgment. He looked from Michael's weathered face and plain-spun clothes to Jess's work-worn hands, and his disapproval was palpable. Over coffee in the formal parlor, a room rarely used, Arthur laid out the story. The Pendletons were an old, wealthy Philadelphia family. Their daughter Lillian had been a beautiful, gentle spirit, but she had committed the ultimate social sin. She had fallen in love with Thomas Vance, a handsome but penniless, aspiring writer with a poet's soul and no prospects. When the family forbade the union, Lillian had eloped, and for that, she was disowned. They had cut off all contact. It was only after learning of her death and the subsequent disappearance of her child that their cold regret had spurred them to begin a search. "Your mother would be heartbroken to see you here," Arthur said bluntly, gesturing vaguely at the world outside the window. "This is no place for a Pendleton. This is a savage, uncultured land of dirt and cattle. You are the sole heiress to your mother's portion of the family fortune, Sumi. A fortune that makes this enterprise," he said, waving a dismissive hand at the ranch, "look like a pauper's farm." He then delivered his purpose. "I haven't come for a social visit. I have come to take you home, back to Philadelphia, where you belong, where you will be educated, introduced to proper society, and take your rightful place in the world. We will undo the damage that has been done." His gaze flickered to Jess, heavy with meaning. "And you will, of course, be expected to marry a man of suitable station." Arthur Pendleton's presence was a stone dropped into the calm waters of Blackwood Creek, and the ripples of disruption spread quickly. He did not stay at the ranch. The accommodations were far too rustic for his tastes, but took the best suite at the Redemption Hotel, from which he launched his campaign to reclaim his niece. He visited Sumi daily, arriving in his ostentatious carriage. He did not speak of love or family in the way Michael did. He spoke of duty, of legacy, of blood. He brought with him a leather-bound album filled with photographs of the Pendleton family, stern-faced men in boardrooms, elegant women in ball gowns, and sprawling stone mansions in the green hills of Pennsylvania. He showed her a miniature portrait of her mother, Lillian, a woman with Sumi's own determined eyes, but a softer, more fragile mouth. "This is your blood, Sumi," he would say, his voice a low, persuasive hum. "The blood of scholars, statesmen, and financiers, not cattle drivers and hired hands." His words, meant to entice, felt like a slow-acting poison. Sumi found herself torn in a way she never expected. She loved her life, her father, and the man she was going to marry. Yet the image of the mother she never knew, and the world that had been denied her, created a flicker of curiosity and a pang of loss for a life she couldn't imagine. For the first time, looking at her own calloused hands, she felt a sliver of self-consciousness. Arthur was masterful in his manipulation. He never raised his voice, but his condescension was a constant weapon. He would engage Michael in conversations about finance or politics, subtly highlighting her adoptive father's lack of formal education. He was even more cruel to Jess. "Mr. McGrath, is it not?" he asked Jess one afternoon, finding him near the corral. "I find your continued presence here remarkable. A man of your lineage being welcomed into the very family your own sought to destroy. It speaks to a certain lack of moral fiber on all sides. Jess's hands tightened on the fence rail, but he met the older man's gaze without flinching. It speaks to forgiveness, Mr. Pendleton, something I doubt you know much about. The tension culminated when Arthur presented Sumi with his final proposition. He had brought with him a trunk from Philadelphia. Inside was a magnificent gown of deep blue silk sewn in the latest Parisian style. It shimmered under the lamplight, a garment from another universe. "This was to be your mother's debutante gown," Arthur said softly. "I have booked you a private car on the eastbound train for next week. Come home, Sumi. Leave this harsh, empty place. Come be the woman your mother was meant to be. This is your last chance to choose your bloodline." That night, Sumi couldn't sleep. She looked at the simple calico dress hanging on her wardrobe door, the one she planned to be married in, and then thought of the shimmering silk in the trunk. The choice felt immense, a decision between two different versions of herself. The next morning, she rode out to the ridge overlooking the valley, the same ridge where she and Jess had stood after the fire. He found her there, sitting quietly on her horse. "Are you going to go?" he asked, his voice betraying none of the fear that was churning in his gut. Sumi looked at him, at his strong, honest face, and the conflict within her finally settled. "He asked me to choose my bloodline," she said. "He thinks my family is a name in a society ledger in Philadelphia. He's wrong." She turned her gaze to the sprawling ranch below the sturdy house that had been her shelter, the green pastures that had healed her soul, the creek that had witnessed her first taste of love. "My family is the man who pulled me from the dust and called me daughter. It's the woman who taught me to bake bread, and the cowboys who tipped their hats and treated me with respect. It's the man who defied his own father to protect my home." She reached out and took his hand. "My blood may be Pendleton, but my heart is Blackwood. This is my home. He isn't asking me to choose a bloodline, Jess. He's asking me to choose a heartline, and mine is already here." When Arthur Pendleton arrived that afternoon, Sumi met him on the veranda. She was not wearing the silk gown. She was wearing her simple, practical riding skirt and a crisp white blouse. She handed him back the portrait of her mother. "She will always be a part of me, and I am grateful to know her face," Sumi said, her voice clear and strong. "But my life is here. My future is here. Thank you for coming, Uncle Arthur, but I am already home." Arthur stared at her for a long moment, a flicker of disbelief in his cold eyes. He saw not a lost, savage girl, but a poised, confident woman who knew her own mind. Without another word, he turned, climbed into his fine carriage, and departed his shadow, receding down the long drive until it was gone. Sumi watched him go, then turned and walked back into the arms of her true family. Sumi's journey was more than a ride across the Texas plains. It was a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. From the depths of abandonment, she found not only a home, but also her own unbreakable will. She proved that the family we choose can be stronger than the one we are born into, and that true love is not about a perfect past, but about fighting for a shared future. Her story reminds us that even after the most devastating fires, new life can grow, and that a heart, no matter how broken, can always learn to love and trust again. If Sumi's journey from a forgotten orphan to the heart of a dynasty moved you, please show your support. Hit that like button to let us know you enjoyed it. Share this incredible story with someone who loves tales of resilience and romance, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more true life dramas from the heart of history. Thank you for listening.